Yeah, massive variability. Okay, you might notice down here in Oscillator 2, we have two buttons. One of them says keyboard. That means that the keyboard is controlling the pitch of Oscillator 2. But if we want to turn that off, all of a sudden, all of the oscillators associated with Oscillator 2 are one pitch and it becomes a drone. And sure, I know we all really love doing bagpipe sounds, but no, that's not what this is for. Well, I mean, you can use it for anything you want, and it is capable of creating a diverse array of effects when used properly. Not like I'm using it right now, but it's really awesome for when you engage the low frequency. What this means is you can use Oscillator 2 as a low frequency oscillator. And when you have the keyboard turned off, that means it stays at one frequency, which is really beneficial for some of the applications of a low frequency oscillator. We're going to dive into it right now so we can hear the effect. Okay, we're going to go up into Polymod. Now, I want to talk about Polymod on its own, but the oscillators kind of depend on it. So, I mean, to do really cool things. What we have up here is a level marked Oscillator 2, and that is the amount of Oscillator 2's modulation of whatever you direct it to. So right now we've turned Oscillator 2 into a low frequency oscillator. Let's listen. Yes, pulses. They sound great. Okay, remember this is a low frequency oscillator with a continuously variable wave shape, which means you can get different waveforms. Like that weird one. Anyway, you're hearing popping. That's because these are too slow for our ears to hear, but they're creating waveforms that will modulate other things, like I'm going to demonstrate right now and stop talking. If we turn on frequency 1, that means Oscillator 2 is modulating the frequency of Oscillator 1, and since it's low frequency, we're just going to get this traditional sound. Oh. Let's turn up Oscillator 1 and turn down Oscillator 2. So that's cool. I mean, we do have an LFO that we can use, but it never hurts to have an oscillator, another LFO to use in certain applications, which we can talk about in a minute. Anyway, so because you have a continuously variable wave shape, you can get all kinds of different sounds. Weird. I mean, this is fantastic. These are polyphonic modulations that you don't usually hear. This isn't usually how this is done. And that's why the Prophet 5 was so cool and why this is even cooler. So you can control the amount. But anyway, so this is us using Oscillator 2 as a low frequency oscillator, which I think is a really great bonus function to have in a polyphonic analog synth. So we're going to turn that off and go back to normal pitch. Turn off Polymod for the moment. Actually, we're about to use it again because what I'm going to talk about now is sync. Now, as you'll remember, sync is when oscillator, well, in this case, usually it's Oscillator 2 doing this, but there's a mapping reason why Oscillator 1 does the sync in this particular synthesizer. Anyway, Oscillator 1, its waveform is forced to reset each time the waveform of Oscillator 2 resets. And so right now we're going to get a sound like this. Okay, here's it without. Here's it with. And you may say, Mark, that doesn't sound any different. Well, I'm sure many of you know it's because they're the same frequency right now. If we start messing with the frequency of Oscillator 1, we're going to hear the sync effect more clearly. And you might say, well, Mark, as you're sweeping through there, I'm just hearing the quantized note values. And that's true, which is actually kind of a cool effect. But of course, we have ways to modulate Oscillator 1 to get more traditional sync effect sounds. Also, don't forget that you can also mess with wave shape as you're doing this and get a whole crazy breadth of timbres. So even if you're not using like the sweeping effects that are possible, again, more wave shapes to choose from. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about modulation. Of course, I'm going to want to talk about each section in depth, but right now we really need to modulate oscillator 1. So one way we could do it is again with a polymod. Polymod allows us to direct the filter envelope to the frequency of oscillator 1. So whatever we have the filter envelope set to is going to control the pitch of oscillator 1. I'm sure we all recognize that sound, and no, I'm not going to play the song. Let's just listen to it. How cool is that? I mean, that's just absolutely awesome. And it's one of the reasons that the Prophet 5 was so popular, because it's such a cool sound to have polyphonically. I love it. Okay, so you have that opportunity. We could also modulate oscillator 1 with aftertouch, again, which we'll talk about more in depth later. We just choose frequency 1 and an amount, and then the harder I press on the keys, the more oscillator 1 will be modulated. So I can play it without starting the effect. And then use the effect whenever I want to. And you can use it in negative too. So that's cool. And of course, we can also modulate oscillator 1 with a low frequency oscillator. So you have a lot of different ways to play with that sync effect. And they all sound cool as well. You can think what you want, but just now I'm like, oh my God, that sounds great. I have to remember that. So not only do you have all of the cool polyphonic functionality that can happen between two oscillators on a polyphonic synth, you have also the sync effect, which can be used polyphonically. One thing we haven't talked about is because you have two oscillators, you can tune them to different frequencies. Ooh, which is happening right now. So like I could tune a fifth up. And that's awesome. But then, when you play chords, you're going to get bigger chords than you intended. Here's a normal G chord. So yeah, you have that opportunity, and so many more. We're just going to have to cover each functionality individually with each individual section, and hopefully I'll make some videos where I draw all of these different functionalities that interrelate and create incredibly complex sounds together. But yeah, so these are our oscillators. Let's also not forget that we have a sub-octave. Here, let's get it. Here, let's turn off oscillator 2, so we have oscillator 1. The sub-octave comes from oscillator 1. So you can really thicken up your sound, obviously, by... so often sub-oscillators make monosynths bassier, and it does the same polyphonically here. You can really hear, wow, okay, now it's got a low end. And certainly you can turn it all the way up. Get some really nice bassy sounds. Make your chords really, really thick, sort of memory mode thickish there. But, with varying degrees of it, just bring it in a little, you can widen out your sound. And since this is the sub-octave of oscillator 1, oscillator 2 is you know, different frequency. Listen to that. Oh my gosh, I'm so happy. I don't know where I'm pulling these chords out of today. They're really funny. Anyway, so you have a sub-octave, and that's going to come in really handy when we talk about unison, which we're not going to yet. You also have noise. We could just sit and listen to that for quite a while, can't we? Noise. It's fantastic. Okay, it's not that exciting. Okay, so that is, in effect, an outline of the oscillator section of the Prophet 6. And if with an oscillator section alone that is that great, you can tell that overall this synthesizer is really out of control wonderful. Okay, we'll talk about more later.